He called me his prettiest ornament. He toasted his great career at New York's most expensive restaurant, telling his partners my greatest skill was charity parties. He forgot I'm the one who signs his paychecks. He forgot that I own 56% of his company. And tonight, I'm signing his last check. My name is Clara. Tonight, I am 36 years old, sitting silently in a dark silk dress that feels more like armor than clothing. We are at the Obsidian Room, a place so exclusive it exists only in whispers for most of Manhattan. You do not simply book a table here. You are granted an audience. The light is low and golden, designed to make everyone look flawless and rich, gleaming off the battalion of crystal glasses that stands before each setting. The air is thick with the smell of truffles and old money, a low hum of conversation punctuated by the delicate, expensive chime of silverware on porcelain. It is a suffocating, perfect performance of wealth. My husband, Nathan Thorne, is standing. At 38, Nathan is the very image of Wall Street success, a subject recently immortalized on the cover of Wall Street Titans magazine. His suit is bespoke. His hair is perfect. His confidence is boundless. He is handsome, and he knows it. He beams at the table, a king presiding over his court. This dinner is for him. It is always for him. Seated around the massive dark wood table are his chief courtiers. His father, Arthur Thorne, the 65-year-old patriarch and CEO of Thorne Capital Management, sits at the head. Flanking us are the senior partners and their wives, women who, like me, are expected to be beautiful, silent, and supportive. Nathan raises his glass, a heavy crystal goblet of champagne that probably costs more than most people's monthly rent. First, he begins, his voice resonating with practiced charisma. I have to thank my father. He nods at Arthur, who nods back, a curt, satisfied gesture of aristocratic approval. For building the foundation, for showing me what true ambition looks like. The table murmurs its assent. Nathan lets the praise settle before turning his gaze, and the entire table's attention directly onto me. And of course, he continues, a predator's smile playing on his lips. I have to thank my prettiest ornament, my lovely wife, Clara. A wave of polite, knowing laughter ripples through the partners. I feel their wives' eyes on me, a mix of pity and shared resignation. I keep my face perfectly neutral, my hands resting lightly in my lap. She's a logistics master, Nathan goes on, his tone shifting into one of light, patronizing mockery. The partners lean in, sensing the punchline. I mean, I run hedge funds, and she runs charity fundraisers. He pauses for effect. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without her scheduling my dry cleaning. This time, the laughter is real, a barking masculine explosion from across the table. One of the partners, a man named Henderson, slaps Nathan on the shoulder. You caught a good one. Thorne keeps you grounded, eh? He did indeed, Arthur rumbles, his voice a gravelly echo of his son's. He looks down the table at me, not with malice, but with the simple, profound indifference of a man who sees me as a decorative appliance. Every successful man needs a great woman, behind the scenes. The final nail, behind the scenes. Nathan winks at me, a grotesque, intimate gesture in this public forum. Don't worry, darling, you're the best in your field. A hot, acidic flush crawls up my neck, burning my cheeks. It is the familiar bitter taste of public humiliation, served with a smile and wrapped in the guise of a compliment. He is praising me for my irrelevance. He is reminding everyone here that his world is the one that matters, and mine is a cute, frivolous hobby. I do not move. I do not blush, though I can feel the heat. I simply hold his gaze, letting a small, placid smile touch my lips. He mistakes it for acquiescence. He always does. The laughter washes over me, a thin, brittle sound that seems to come from a great distance. I do not react. I do not flinch or look away. I simply watch Nathan, my husband, as he soaks in the approval of his father and his fawning partners. That small, placid smile remains fixed on my lips. It is the smile I wear to gallery openings, to charity boards, and to dinners where I am meant to be seen and not heard. It is a shield, and tonight, it is a weapon. My thoughts are not on the casual, cruel humiliation. They are not on the heat I felt rising in my neck. They are on the weight in my lap. A simple black alligator clutch. It is elegant, understated, and lethally expensive. Nathan bought it for me last Christmas. He had presented it with a flourish, saying, "Something to hold your lipstick, darling." He was wrong about that, too. Inside that clutch, nestled against the dark silk lining, is not a phone. It is not a compact. It is not a tube of red lipstick. It is a single sheet of paper, folded precisely into thirds. It is the only thing I needed to bring tonight. It is a copy summary, really, for dramatic effect of the final executed shareholder agreement for Thorn Capital Management, the very company they are all toasting, the company Nathan believes he is destined to inherit, that Arthur believes he still controls. They laugh at my charity parties. Nathan dismisses my work as running fundraisers. It has been the most useful, most potent misconception of my entire marriage. They hear the name, the Vance Charitable Fund, my maiden name, and they picture me in ball gowns, tasting catering samples and approving floral arrangements. They picture a bored, pretty heiress playing philanthropist. They cannot picture the truth. They do not know that the Vance Charitable Fund is not a charity. It is a holding company, a deeply complex, ruthlessly efficient entity that, through a labyrinth of 3 separate, nested Delaware shell corporations, controls 56% of the voting shares of Thorn Capital Management. They are celebrating in my house. They are drinking my wine. Nathan is toasting his success, blissfully unaware that he is my employee. My silence stretches. Nathan, having finished his triumphant toast, finally sits down. He sees my stillness, my unchanged smile, and, as always, he misreads the room. He mistakes calculation for petulance. He sees a sulking wife, not a predator about to strike. He leans in, his expensive cologne washing over me, and places his hand on mine where it rests on the table, a light, condescending pat. "Come on, Clara," he murmurs, "just for me," though the table can see the gesture of a husband handling his emotional wife. "It was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive. Drink up, darling. Enjoy the party I'm throwing." I turn my head slowly to look at him. I do not pull my hand away. I let him feel the coldness of my skin. I pick up my water glass, not the champagne he poured for me. I take a small, deliberate sip. The ice clicks softly against the crystal. "You're right, Nathan," I say. My voice is perfectly level. "Just a bit of fun." I set the glass down. The sound is tiny, but in the sudden lull, it sounds like a gavel. I look straight into his eyes, bypassing the easy confidence and aiming for the small, insecure man I know is hiding underneath. My voice is not loud, but it is sharp, clear, and cold, slicing through the remaining dinner conversation like a razor. Speaking of which, I have a rather amusing story of my own. Every head at the table snaps toward me. The chatter stops instantly. Even the partners' wives, usually so adept at pretending not to listen, are frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. They are confused by this sudden, jarring shift in the script. The ornament, am speaking out of turn. I hold Nathan's gaze. His smile is faltering, confusion creeping into his eyes. He is realizing, far too late, that this is not the wife he knows. "It starts," I say, my voice carrying clearly to Arthur at the head of the table. "Almost exactly 18 months ago. 5 years ago. That is when this story truly begins. Long before the crisis. Long before the toast tonight. Nathan believes my life began the moment I met him. He thinks he plucked me from a sea of pretty, aimless women at a party and gave me a purpose, a name, a stage. He believes his world is the only one that exists. He is wrong. 5 years ago, I was not Mrs. Nathan Thorne, the charming hostess. I was Clara Vance, and I was invisible then for a very different reason. I was the founder, architect, and ghost in the machine behind Aegis Algorithms. It was a name no one at this table has ever heard, a company that never had a public launch party or a flashy logo. It was just me, a dark room, a wall of monitors, and an artificial intelligence trading platform I started building in my Stanford dorm room. Aegis was not just fast, it was predictive. It could analyze global market sentiment from unstructured data news reports, social media, satellite imagery, and see the shape of the market 3 seconds before it moved. It was a 21st century crystal ball. When I was 32 years old, I sold it. I did not sell it in a blaze of tech world glory with magazine covers and fawning interviews. I sold it in a deal so quiet, so heavily cloaked in non-disclosure agreements, that it barely made a whisper. A private tech giant acquired it for $800 million. The deal was designed for silence. I was designed for silence, and I was tired. I was utterly burned out from a 24/7 world of code, data, and sleepless nights. I had a fortune I could not spend and a life I was not living. 3 months after the wire transfer cleared, I met Nathan Thorne at an art gala. I was there because I was trying to learn how to be a person again, not just a programmer. He saw me, standing alone in front of a Rothko, and he saw precisely what he wanted to see. He saw the name Vance, which he associated with old, fading New York money. He assumed I was an event planner, or perhaps, as he joked to me later, a beautiful heiress looking for a husband to manage her trust fund. He was, I admit, drawn to my mind. I could hold a conversation about economic theory, geopolitics, and art, but he misinterpreted my analytical processing. He mistook it for social sharpness, a kind of clever, high-end wit. He thought I was savvy, not brilliant. I remember the exact moment he sealed his own fate, though neither of us knew it. We were at a bar a few weeks later, the kind of dark-paneled place he loved. He asked me what I did. I was vague. I was bound by my NDAs, but I was also, quite frankly, tired of trying to explain a world he could not possibly comprehend. I used to work in tech, I said, stirring my drink. I just finished a very big project. He smiled, that same patronizing, indulgent smile I saw at this table tonight. He reached across and literally patted my head. "That's nice," he said, his voice full of warm condescension. "It's good to have little hobbies." A hobby that had, at that point, given me a net worth more than 10 times that of his father's. I married him. I married him partly because I loved him, or at least I loved the idea of him, the idea of the normal life he represented, a life with dinners and weekends, and a structure that did not involve watching code compile at 4 in the morning. I was so very tired of my old life. I learned very quickly what normal life meant in the Thorne family. It meant that I had to become invisible so that Nathan's colossal, fragile ego could have the entire spotlight. My intelligence was not an asset to our partnership. It was a threat to his dominance. He loved my degrees from Stanford. He loved to mention them at parties when introducing me. But in the privacy of our home, he mocked them. He would come home from a long day at Thorne Capital Management, puffing his chest out about some brilliant trade he had made, a trade I knew was basic, outdated, and frankly, just lucky. He would find me reading a white paper on quantitative analysis. "More book theory. Clara," he would say, loosening his tie. "That's not how the real world works. You cannot learn what I do from a textbook. You need real-world experience." He meant his experience. The experience of walking into a corner office his father had built, running plays his father had designed, in a company that was already slow, bloated, and refusing to modernize. He had no idea what a real-world high-stakes fight for survival looked like. He had no idea I had been in the trenches of one, and won, before I even knew his name. So I let him. I let him believe I was the hobbyist. I let him think my book theory was cute. I let him believe his real-world prowess was what paid for our beautiful penthouse. It was the easiest, most convenient lie I ever told, and it was the perfect camouflage. I leaned into the role they had written for me. If they wanted a socialite, I would be the most effective socialite New York had ever seen. I began to run my family's Vance Charitable Fund. To them, the name sounded like old money, dusty and respectable, something to keep a bright, understimulated wife busy. They had no idea it was the legal, operational name for my family office, the entity that managed and deployed my $800 million fortune. My work became their favorite talking point. I took what had been small, polite fundraisers and applied the full force of my analytical and strategic skills. I did not just plan parties, I optimized them. I ran data models on donor behavior. I built predictive algorithms for guest list C-suite acquisitions. I applied network theory to seating charts. I did not just raise money, I executed high-yield social capital campaigns. The results were, as Nathan loved to boast, staggering. Small hospital galas turned into multi-million-dollar events. Obscure art benefits became the most sought-after tickets of the season. Nathan and Arthur were deeply impressed, not by my intellect, but by what they saw as my social prowess. They saw it as proof that I was the perfect hostess, a woman who was fantastically well-connected. They never once, in 5 years, asked the most logical question. They never wondered how a woman they believed to be a simple hostess managed to get the most reclusive, powerful tech CEOs in the world to attend her Tuesday night charity dinners. They never asked why the founder of a massive AI conglomerate or the head of a venture capital firm that had just taken 3 companies public would fly from California to New York to bid on a silent auction item for me. They were not my contacts. They were my former colleagues. The men who had sat across the table from me during the Aegis acquisition, the ones who had tried, and failed, to lowball me. They came to my parties not out of social obligation, but out of a deep and abiding respect for the mind that had built Aegis, and, perhaps, a healthy amount of fear. This perfect gilded cover extended to my husband's world. I was expected to be a supportive wife, so I was. About 4 times a year, I would attend the quarterly board meetings for Thorn Capital Management. I did not have a seat at the table. Of course, I was a guest, the wife of the heir apparent. I would sit in one of the comfortable leather chairs against the wall, and Nathan would joke, "Clara's here to take the notes." I would smile, and I would pour the coffee for the partners, and as they discussed strategy, as Arthur pontificated and Nathan preened, I listened, and I silently, methodically, analyzed their entire business. I saw every flaw, every structural weakness they were too arrogant to notice. I saw their crippling dependence on antiquated 20-year-old funds. I saw their complete and terrified refusal to modernize, to adopt the very algorithmic tools that were making their entire business model obsolete. I watched, month after month, as Arthur explicitly rejected any proposal for modern risk assessment tools. He would wave his hand dismissively and call it computer witchcraft or Silicon Valley nonsense. He would say, "We work on gut instinct here. That's what built this firm." His gut, I calculated, was wrong 68% of the time. My silence was my laboratory. Their profound, unshakable contempt for my mind became the most perfect camouflage I could have ever designed. They would hand me their quarterly reports, treating them as paperweights, and I would go home and run a full diagnostic. No one ever, for 1 second, suspected that the woman they thought was agonizing over floral arrangements and seating charts was the only person in that room who could read a complex, multi-layered balance sheet and see the rot hiding right beneath the surface. They believed my expertise was in canapes, and that underestimation was the single greatest strategic advantage I have ever possessed. This is my story. And it brings us to the moment the game truly changed, 18 months ago. It was a Tuesday evening. I remember because I was tracking a weather front over the Atlantic that was about to disrupt shipping lanes, and I was considering a short position on 3 major logistics companies. Nathan was late, as usual, at some client dinner. I was in my home office, surrounded by my own monitors, the ones he thought I used for online shopping and reading blogs. My personal phone rang, not my house phone, my private cell. The number was Arthur Thorne. That alone set off an alarm. Arthur did not call me. He spoke to me at parties, but he never initiated contact. He communicated with his son, who then communicated with me. I was a subordinate, twice removed. I answered. Arthur. Clara. His voice was not the booming, confident baritone of the boardroom. It was a high, thin, reedy sound, cracked with a panic so profound I almost did not recognize it. Clara, I need... Are you alone? Is Nathan there? He is not, I said, my eyes still on the weather data. What is wrong? I am in the office, he choked out, and I could hear the wetness of his terror. It is over. It is all over. The company... Clara, the company is finished. This was not the rot I had seen. The rot I had analyzed was slow, arrogant, and structural. This was a sudden, catastrophic failure. This was different. Explain, I said, my voice calm. And he did. It tumbled out of him in a torrent of pathetic, terrified confession. It was not a bad investment. It was not a market crash. It was him. He had been covering personal losses for years, massive, reckless bets on high-risk offshore derivatives, and he had been covering them not with his own money, but with client margin funds. He had been illegally using his clients' escrowed money. It was not just bad business. It was a felony. It was large-scale embezzlement. There is an audit, he whispered, the words sounding like they were being physically torn from him. A surprise SEC audit. They called today. They are coming in 10 days. 10. I did the math instantly. What is the deficit? 120 million, he sobbed, and the sound of this proud, arrogant man breaking was grotesque. Clara, if I cannot fill that hole before they arrive, I will go to prison. The firm will be liquidated. Our clients, our friends. Everyone will be wiped out. Nathan. Oh God, Nathan. His whole life. I was silent, processing. The scale of the fraud was breathtaking, but the silence he mistook for wifely, idiotic shock. His voice changed, the panic receded slightly, replaced by a desperate, fumbling attempt at manipulation. He had not called me to confess. He had called me to use me. Clara, listen to me, he said, trying to sound like a father. I need your help. For Nathan's sake. We cannot let this destroy him. It is just a cash flow issue, a temporary mismatch. What do you want, Arthur? The penthouse, he said, the words coming quickly. It is in your name, I know. A formality when you married. We can use it as collateral. Just for a few days. A bridge loan. I have some papers here. If you could just come down and sign them. I have a banker waiting. No one has to know. Not even Nathan. And there it was. The breathtaking, bottomless pit of their condescension. He was in the middle of a life-ending crisis, and his only plan was to lure his naive daughter-in-law into his office to trick her into signing mortgage documents. He was going to defraud me to cover his own fraud. He did not know I had paid for the penthouse in cash with a single wire transfer from a bank he had never heard of, 2 days before our wedding. He did not know it was my asset, unencumbered and untouchable. He was crying now, performing his desperation. The family legacy, Clara. Think of the shame. Nathan would be ruined, his name destroyed. I stared at the glowing green and red lines of my weather model. I watched this powerful, arrogant man who had dismissed my intellect and treated me as a child, completely dissolve. He was not a titan. He was just a small, stupid criminal weeping on the phone. I closed the weather model. My short position could wait. A much larger opportunity had just presented itself. I let the silence hang for another 10 seconds, long enough for his panic to peak again. "Arthur," I said finally, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly cool. "Stop crying. It is unbecoming. Let me see what I can do." I hung up on Arthur. My second call was to Evelyn Reed. Evelyn is not just a lawyer, she is a fortress. She was the one who structured the Aegis sale, the one who built the labyrinth of NDAs that kept me invisible. She is the only person on Earth who knows the full extent of my assets and my capabilities. I explained the situation in less than 60 seconds. The embezzlement, the SEC audit, the 10-day window, the $120 million deficit, Arthur's pathetic attempt to get me to sign over my penthouse. Evelyn was silent for a moment. I could hear the faint click of her pen on her desk. "Clara," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of all emotion. $120 million is not a loan. You are not a bank. This is a leveraged buyout. You are not saving his company. You are acquiring it." "I know," I said. "He has 10 days. I think we can do it in 24 hours. "We can," Evelyn replied. "I'll start drafting." The plan was surgical, brutal, and beautiful in its simplicity. The Vance Charitable Fund would provide the capital. The $120 million would be wired not as a loan, which would have to be disclosed, but as a capital injection. But there was a condition. Evelyn drafted a stock transfer agreement. In exchange for the infusion, Arthur Thorne, as the majority shareholder, would be required to secretly transfer his entire controlling stake, 51% of the voting shares, to the fund. This was the second twist, the one that even Arthur would never see coming. I already owned 5% of Thorne Capital. I had been quietly buying it on the open market over the past few years, using one of the Delaware shells. I had told myself it was a hedge, a simple investment after I'd seen the first few computer witchcraft irregularities in their books. But in my heart, I knew I was placing my pieces on the board. Arthur's 51%, added to my existing 5, would bring my total to 56%. Not just a majority, not just a controlling interest. Absolute, undeniable, ironclad control. Evelyn worked through the night. The deal was not structured as coming from me, or from the Vance Fund, which Arthur would have recognized. The agreement was drafted as a strategic investment from a private Swiss equity firm, a silent partner stepping in to stabilize the company. This Swiss firm was, of course, just another shell company, set up by Evelyn years ago for just such an occasion, with the Vance Fund acting as the anonymous, undisclosed guarantor. The next morning, Evelyn, not me, met with Arthur. She presented him with a 300-page contract, a mountain of complex, dense, international financial law. She explained it was his only option. Arthur was trapped. He was too desperate to read the fine print. He was too terrified of his own fraud being exposed to even think about hiring his own lawyer, which would have meant revealing his crime. He saw the Swiss firm's name. He saw the wire transfer instructions for $120 million, and he saw his salvation. He thought he was being rescued by some faceless European investors, pulling off a brilliant save. He had no idea he was handing the keys to his entire kingdom, the legacy he was so desperate to protect, to the daughter-in-law he thought was too stupid to balance a checkbook. He signed every page. The wire transfer was made from my fund, routed through Switzerland, and hit Thorne Capital's books with 2 days to spare before the audit. The SEC came, saw a healthy, cash-flush company, and left. The crisis was over. That night, Arthur came to the penthouse. He did not look at me. He just stood in the foyer, a shrunken, defeated old man. "It is done," he mumbled. "Thank you." I stopped him before he could leave. "We have one final agreement. Arthur. Not one Evelyn drafted. This one is between you and me." He looked up, his eyes watery with a sickening mix of shame and servile gratitude. "Nathan can never know," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "He can never know about the fraud, the audit, or this investment. He will continue to believe his father is a genius and that this company is his birthright. His entire career, his entire sense of self, depends on him believing that you are a titan." Yes, of course," he stammered, relieved. He thought this was a mercy. "You will stay on as CEO in name," I continued, "but you will report to me. You will send me a full, private financial summary every single week, and you will play the part. You understand me." "Yes, Clara. Thank you, Clara." He was so grateful, so pathetically grateful to the woman who had just stolen his company, all to protect the son he had raised to be an arrogant fool. He was a prisoner of his own crime, and I was the new warden. The $120 million of my money saved Thorn Capital from immediate extinction. But it was not the cash that made it thrive. Cash was just a bandage on a wound. The real disease was the one Arthur and Nathan shared a belief in their own gut instinct over modern, data-driven reality. So, I cured the disease. A few weeks after the audit, I had Evelyn's Swiss shell company recommend a new third-party risk analysis software to Arthur. I told him it was a mandatory condition of the investment. The software, I explained, was a simple tool to help him avoid any future mismatches. It was not a simple tool. It was a scaled-down, firewalled version of the Aegis algorithm. I plugged my own predictive engine directly into the heart of their firm, disguising it as consulting software from a boutique vendor. The effect was instantaneous. It was like giving a Model T a jet engine. For the next 18 months, Thorn Capital did not just recover, it exploded. The computer witchcraft that Arthur had once mocked was now silently guiding every single trade. The firm had its best year in its history, then its best quarter, then its best month. And Nathan, my brilliant husband, who knew nothing of the crisis, the audit, the fraud, or the algorithm, believed he was the one doing it. I watched, as if in a science experiment, as his ego began to metastasize. He genuinely believed this miraculous turnaround was the result of his own genius. He started to believe in his own legend. Every trade the Aegis algorithm flagged and served to his team, he saw as a product of his real-world experience. He was not just a titan, he was an oracle. His arrogance, once merely insufferable, became monumental. He started to pity me openly. The condescension he once reserved for private moments now became a regular feature at dinner parties. He would publicly, laughingly, lament my lack of ambition. One night, he came home, having just authorized himself a 7-figure bonus, a bonus I had, of course, reviewed and approved through Arthur and found me going over the catering invoices for the hospital gala. He loosened his tie, a new, smug gesture he had adopted. "You see this, Clara," he said, waving his new watch in the air. "This is how real wealth is made. This is what it looks like to build something, not running around in circles planning parties." I just smiled, looking up from my paperwork. I smiled, knowing that my signature, as C. Vance Director, the Vance Fund, was the one on the document that had approved his promotion to president. I smiled, knowing my algorithm had generated the very funds he was using to pay for that watch. I smiled, knowing he was a puppet bragging about how well he danced, completely unaware of his strings. Arthur, meanwhile, played his part perfectly. He was a man trapped by his own shame. He publicly lauded his son, anointing him the firm's new visionary. He gave speeches at luncheons about passing the torch to the next generation. He had to. His freedom, his reputation, and his entire fragile world depended on him playing the role I had assigned, and every Friday at 5 o'clock, like clockwork, a password-encrypted email would land in my private inbox. It was Arthur's weekly financial report, a detailed, groveling summary of every move the company made, sent not to his Swiss investors, but directly to me. This dinner, tonight, was the absolute climax of this 18-month-long fantasy. Getting his face on Wall Street Titans magazine was the final confirmation of his own divinity. He did not just believe he was a genius, he had convinced the world. He had arranged this entire spectacle at the Obsidian Room to celebrate himself, a monument to an illusion. He truly, genuinely believed he had done it all himself. And as I sat there, listening to him prepare for his speech, I decided this grand illusion had run its course. A scientist knows when an experiment is over. It was time to show him the data. The world had shrunk to the polished surface of our table. Every sound in the Obsidian Room, the distant clink of a glass, the low murmur of another party, the footsteps of a waiter seemed to have vanished. All that existed was this pool of golden light, this circle of stunned faces, all waiting for the punchline of my amusing story. They were still expecting a toast, a charming anecdote about a difficult caterer. They were still smiling, their expressions frozen in polite, nervous anticipation. I let the silence stretch, letting their discomfort build. I looked past Nathan, past the confused partners, to Arthur. Then I spoke, my voice no louder than before, but it cleaved the night in two. 18 months ago, I said, this company, Thorn Capital Management, was technically bankrupt. The smiles did not just fade, they shattered. The air in the room became thin, solid, and cold. I watched Arthur. His face, usually so ruddy with expensive wine and self-satisfaction, drained of all color. He looked like a corpse in a bespoke suit. His hand, the one holding his wine glass, began to tremble violently. The crystal, heavy with Dom Perignon, vibrated, its contents shivering. "Clara," he said, his voice a strangled whisper. "Clara, what are you saying? Stop this. This is not the time. You are ruining Nathan's night." Nathan, ever the performer, tried to laugh it off. The sound was a high-pitched, anxious bark, completely unlike his usual confident boom. "Darling, what on earth are you talking about, bankrupt?" He gestured around the opulent room. "We just had our best year in history. I think you've had a little too much wine." He looked at the partners, seeking allies, his smile a desperate grimace. "She has had a little too much." I did not give him the courtesy of a glance. I kept my eyes fixed, like a laser, on his father. "Is that right, Arthur?" I asked. The table was so quiet I could hear the tiny, frantic sound of Arthur's breathing. "Or perhaps we should talk about the $120 million deficit, the one you created with your unfortunate derivative trades. Should we talk about the client margin accounts you emptied? Or, if you prefer, we can talk about the SEC investigation, the one that was scheduled, what was it, just 10 days out, the one I made disappear." The word SEC detonated in the center of the table. The partners recoiled as if I had thrown a knife. Their wives, previously just bored window dressing, were now staring, wide-eyed, mouths open. These were not words of polite society. These were words of ruin, of prison, of social and financial oblivion. Nathan's forced laugh died, his face contorted, a mask of pure confusion and rising panic. What a deficit, Dad, an SEC investigation. What the hell is going on? He was looking at his father, pleading for a denial. But Arthur was mute, his eyes fixed on me, his expression one of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew the trap had sprung. Now, slowly, with the deliberate grace of a surgeon, I reached down to the black alligator clutch in my lap, Nathan's Christmas gift. I clicked the small gold clasp. The sound was obscenely loud in the silence. The men watched my hand. They still, even now, half expected me to pull out a mirror. My fingers found what they were looking for, I withdrew the single tri-folded sheet of paper. I held it for a moment between two fingers. "Nathan," I said, finally turning to my husband. His eyes were wild. "I think you should see this. It concerns my little hobby." He started to reach across the table, his hand clumsy, but I did not give it to him. I leaned forward, past my uneaten appetizer, and placed the document neatly, precisely, in the exact center of the table. It landed with a faint whisper on the linen, right next to the gleaming $5,000 bottle of champagne he had ordered to celebrate his own genius. He stared at it as if it were a serpent. The other partners leaned in, their eyes darting from the paper to Arthur to me. "That," I announced to the table, my voice clear and steady, "is a summary of the current ownership structure of Thorn Capital Management." Nathan's hand, the one that had just been raised in a toast, shot out and snatched the paper from the table. His movements were jerky, all his practiced smoothness gone. He unfolded it. He read it. His eyes scanned the page, a simple, typed summary. I watched the comprehension fail to dawn, replaced by pure, animal confusion. He read it again, his lips moving silently, forming the words. Then his head snapped up, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "The Vance Charitable Fund," he read aloud, his voice cracking. 56%, majority voting shareholder. "What is this?" He looked around the table, wild-eyed, looking for someone to explain the prank. This is a joke. It has to be. This is fake." I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm. "As you said, Nathan, just a bit of fun." I then turned my full attention, for the last time, to Arthur Thorne. He was no longer trembling. He was frozen, a statue of a man, his face a waxy, pale gray. "You," I said, and the partners flinched at my tone. "You violated our silent agreement. You were allowed to keep your title, your office, your dignity, on the condition that you remembered who was in charge. Instead, you allowed this charade, this celebration of a lie." I turned to the partners, my voice hardening. "He didn't just have a deficit. He embezzled client funds. Arthur, your friends, your partners. He stole from all of you." A collective, sharp intake of breath. The words embezzled and SEC had landed. The party was over. The festive air was sucked from the room, replaced by the cold, sterile atmosphere of a courtroom. "I saved you from prison," I continued, my voice a flat, emotionless line. I was speaking to Arthur, but my words were for the entire table. "I stabilized your firm. I did it in exchange for one thing: absolute control. And you took that control, that gift of survival, and you used it to continue this pathetic performance. You used it to inflate your son's ego and pretend he was a king, when he was just a child playing in a house I bought." Nathan finally found his voice. It was not a roar, it was a shriek. "Clara, stop you. You did this." He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a grotesque mask of rage and disbelief. "You've been behind this, all of it." "All of what, Nathan?" I asked, my voice genuinely curious. "All of what, precisely? The money, the firm, the software," he sputtered. "Yes," I said, I have signed every single one of your paychecks for the last 18 months. Nathan, I personally approved every $1 million bonus you gave yourself. I was the Swiss firm that consulted with your father. I deployed the Aegis algorithm that created your best year in history, all while you were standing in our living room, mocking my parties." I let that hang in the air. The final, perfect, devastating silence. Then, I stood up. My chair made a small, discreet scraping sound on the dark wood floor. It was the only sound in the room. Every eye was on me. Nathan's, full of hate. Arthur's, completely empty. The partners, wide with terror and calculation, already wondering where their money was. "And as the majority shareholder," I announced, placing my hands on the table and leaning in. "I am making some long overdue personnel changes." I looked at Arthur. His glass had slipped from his numb fingers and was lying on its side, champagne pooling on the white linen. "Arthur, you are fired. Effective immediately. Your access codes have already been revoked. Security will meet you in the lobby tomorrow morning to escort you from the building. Do not try to enter your office." Then, I looked at my husband. His handsome face was mottled, his mouth open, speechless for the first time in his life. "Nathan, you too," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, as if speaking to a difficult child. "You are also fired. But on the bright side, you no longer have to worry about your dry cleaning. You will finally have plenty of free time to do it yourself." The silence that fell was not just a lack of sound, it was a physical weight, a sudden, crushing pressure that seemed to suck all the air from the obsidian room. It was deafening. I could see, in my peripheral vision, that even the perpetually moving, ghost-like waiters in the far corners of the room had frozen, trays held mid-air. The other diners at other tables, sensing a shift in the very atmosphere, had paused, their own conversations dying. Our table was a tableau of ruin. I looked down. My meal, a complex, $10,000 creation, sat untouched. I picked up my heavy linen napkin, the last time I would ever touch thorn-crested linen. I folded it once, neatly, and placed it on the table with a soft, final whisper. The gesture was complete. Nathan, his face a horrifying collage of purpled rage and white-hot panic, lurched to his feet. His chair screeched backward, and his body slammed into the table, knocking his full glass of red wine over. It shattered against a plate, and the dark liquid spread like blood across the pristine white cloth. "Clara, wait!" he screamed, his voice no longer the confident baritone of a titan, but the desperate, cracking plea of a child. "Wait, you cannot do this to me. You cannot do this to my family. This is my family's company." He lunged for my arm, his fingers clawing, trying to physically drag me back into the role I had just shed. I pulled my hand back, yanking it from his grasp as if he were diseased. "It has not been your family's company for 18 months. "Nathan," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "It is, and has been, mine." I turned from his collapsing form to the stunned, ashen-faced partners. They were not friends, not enemies. They were just assets on a balance sheet I now had to manage. Their eyes were wide, not with concern for the thorns, but with the primal animal fear of men who have just realized their money is in jeopardy. "There will be an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, I stated, my voice the boardroom commander I had always been. "A new CEO, Ms. Evelyn Reed, will be taking over all operations. Do not bother Arthur or Nathan. They will not be attending." I gave them a single hard look. "Your assets, gentlemen, are perfectly safe." I have seen to that. The incompetence that endangered them, however, is not. With that, I turned my back on all of it, on the spilled wine, on the untouched food, on the shattered men, and on the shell of my marriage. I began the long walk toward the door, my heels clicking a steady, even rhythm on the floor. It was the only sound in the entire restaurant. I walked past the frozen staff, past the whispering diners, leaving the $10,000 disaster behind me. I reached the grand arched doorway. As my hand touched the polished wood, a furious buzzing started from inside my alligator clutch. It vibrated angrily, a last, desperate alarm. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with his name. Nathan. He was calling, already, trying one last time to pull me back. I looked at the name, the last vestige of my old life. I pressed my thumb to the screen and did not decline the call. I simply silenced it. I silenced him. I slipped the now quiet phone back into my purse. The maitre d', his face a mask of professional panic, rushed to pull the heavy door open for me. He had no idea what had just happened, only that he wanted me gone. "Good evening, Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I paused in the doorway, the frame between my old life and my new one. I turned to look at this man, a man who had only ever seen me as an appendage. "It's Vance now," I said, my voice perfectly clear, perfectly calm. Just Vance. I stepped out of the suffocating, truffle-scented warmth and into the cold, clean, sharp air of the New York night. It hit my face, and for the first time in 5 years, I took a real breath. I left the chaos, the broken careers, and the wreckage of their lives burning quietly behind me in that golden room. And I did not, for 1 second, look back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories and give this video a like. You can also show your support by hitting the hype button to help this story reach more listeners.